Hello, everybody. Welcome to my first YouTube video on this channel. I'm really pumped to finally put something out there and just talk about football. The first few ideas I have about these videos that I want to put out is talking about potential spots for new head coaches, and currently I'm really interested in the Raiders. In the future, I definitely want to talk about the Jets, the Saints, the Jaguars, but for those, I kind of want to wait a little bit in terms of if they're going to fire their GM or fire their head coach. And I don't want to speculate on that just yet. Even though I'm doing that for the Raiders, I think it's a little bit different in my opinion, just because with the new GM from last year, usually they have their own head coach that they bring in. But in this case, Tom Telesco came over last year and is there this year as well. Not last year, but this year. And Antonio Pierce was already re-signed to be the new head coach. So making a little bit of a different speculation in terms of this. So I'm probably wishy-washy or being a hypocrite. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and dive in and let's see what we're going to be talking about. So some of the content that we're going to be talking about, it's only 2 bullet points, but we want to address the facts. And that term or that bullet point I just wanted to talk about is overall team, especially on the offensive side of the ball, in terms of like OC, drafting and development, the players that they need to bring in, but just sort of figuring out the main issues that is sort of plaguing the Raiders and trying to and potentially holding them back from what they could be. And then the next one is just potential coaches that could be coming into the organization and sort of developing an identity for the future. I think most of the times we forget that these teams that are rebuilding, I think there needs to be some continuity in terms of the GM and head coach, which allows them to build sort of a scheme, a fit, to bring in players that can really be maximized. And I think coaching can play a huge role in players. You see it time and time again. These fantastic players that can really play are just not schemed correctly. And sometimes it is probably a 50-50 split between the player motivation to live up to their expectations that they might have had in a draft, but also on the coach to scheme and develop those players into someone that can be a foundational piece for their team. So we're going to go ahead and address the facts. I think the number one thing is, addressing the quarterback room. I think this is the biggest area of improvement that needs to occur, especially on a team coming into the year with Gardner Minshew and Aidan O'Connell. And like I prefaced before, I don't think any of these players are, I'm never going to say they're terrible players or awful players or, something like that. I think in the sport of football and sports in the area of sports, it's easy to critique players just because, we get to see them at the highest level and also in critical situations. And, it's hard not to judge if something just doesn't go that way. But, they could definitely become starters somewhere if the right fit. You see it with Sam Darnold and everything like that. But in this case, Gardner Minshew and Aidan O'Connell, I just don't see that as the foundational pieces for the Raiders. And Aidan O'Connell did play really well against the Kansas City Chiefs, but it looks like he went down for a season-ending injury yesterday. And, for me, Aidan O'Connell, I think, can become a decent backup to someone that could be starting in this league. And case in point for me, he reminds me so much of a little bit of Davis Mills for the Texans, who, came into an organization, played, I think he was a 3rd round or 4th round pick from Stanford, had the opportunities to play. And, a lot of people were like, hey, let's give him a shot and let's see what we can do. And, I don't think those same people that are going to say give him a shot and bring in CJ Stroud and see what Stroud has done to still give Mills a shot. So, definitely still a worthwhile player to have, right? Backup quarterbacks are still valuable in this league, and we see that time and time again with the contracts that they're getting. But I just don't see that with Aidan O'Connell, and Gardner Minshew has broken his collarbone, and we saw him as a starter just not really get the Raiders to where they want to be. And then that could also be with offensive coordinator with Luke Getsy and everything like that. But for me, if I'm critiquing AOC just a little bit, I think, he has that drop back quarterback, that old school pocket quarterback without the pocket movement that a lot of these elite quarterbacks have, or good quarterbacks have, that can, kind of dance, I like to say, in the pocket and kind of, buy time, especially with the offensive line that's not that great. And so I think this is where the Raiders are just going to end up going, right? If they're picking, I think they're projected number one now. I know Jacksonville had a bye, I believe, or no, they played, and they lost as well, and the Raiders lost, so they're 2-10, and I think this is just where the Raiders are going to go in the top 5 to top 7 range. I highly doubt they're going to slip past that, but when you're in that situation, you definitely got to go quarterback. And I think Tom Telesco is going to realize that, especially when he went Justin Herbert for the Chargers after losing Phillip Rivers. And then Tom Telesco builds, on paper, good teams. And I think that comes down to coaching to really execute those players to make them, better and put them in good positions. And hopefully he can make that decision for the Raiders in terms of choosing the correct staff. And so you want to develop and grow these players, not only at the quarterback position, but your running backs, your offensive line, your tight end group I feel like is your main strength on the offense at the moment. And then wide receiver room, I do like Jacoby Myers, but I don't think you want him to be your sort of alpha wide receiver. I think he's still a fantastic wide receiver that you want on your team, and definitely extremely underrated. But you definitely have to bring in some few more pieces that can really elevate this team. And just imagine if Devontae Adams was still here and you're bringing in Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward or whatever quarterback you believe, like Tom Telesco and the front office believes to be the quarterback. I mean, imagine playing with, if you didn't get traded, Adams, Myers, Bowers, and then bringing in a potential running back in free agency or in the draft. So I think it's interesting to see, and you see it with the Commanders, right? Coaching staff really elevates the whole team. Cliff Kingsbury has done a fantastic job with Jaden Daniels and also the rushing attack alongside with the offensive line. Really took them to a higher level. I know I was watching the Franchise Guy, and I think he listed the Commanders pretty low in terms of the offensive line, was kind of skeptical. And now you're seeing them, play decent and allow like the rushing game to play pretty well, and their offense is, one of the best in the leagues. And a lot of times Cliff does get found out, but it doesn't matter, right? This quarterback is still developing for the future, and if Cliff's not there, at least you're developing your quarterback to a degree, and instead of putting him in a situation like that you might have seen with Shane Waldron and Caleb Williams that could stunt, and potentially with the Patriots, right, with Van Pelt as the OC. I haven't broke them down, but coaching plays a huge part. So in this case, the Raiders are currently 12th highest in sack allowed percentage at 8.4% and have a QB pressure rate of 38.1%, makes them the 5th highest rate. So I got these from Next Gen Stats, just want to put my sources. And then Raiders are also last in run play percentage at 34.3%, along with team rushing success dead last at 31.6%. So, this makes it hard to move the ball, period. And if defenses know you're not going to run well, just let the edges, pin their ears back and go without fear of getting hit by a play action or a bootleg. We're just going to attack the quarterback. And so it kind of makes you one-dimensional and can take the game away and kind of get out of hand. But I mean, they can really focus on developing the run, and I think they're starting to do that with Scott Turner, which we're going to be talking about next. Is finding the the right OC. Could that be Scott Turner? They really want to pound the ball inside, and they're doing that with Sincere McCormick, undrafted free agent from UTSA. I think he was on the practice squad and was injured maybe the year before, but now he's starting to get his run in. He's fresh legs, especially late in the season, gives them the opportunity to get an idea of who this could be, especially with Zamir White and Alexander Madison out. And so, trying to develop the O-line and trying to get them a little bit in a better situation can do that. So, can Scott Turner really turn it around? No pun intended. I don't know if that is a pun, but just going to get the emphasis of running the ball. And I think there's going to be a change in philosophy, I feel like, that the Raiders are in a good spot if my idea of how they want to not develop, but sort of team build and sort of have, a different offensive scheme, which is, fullbacks have, gone away from this league at all. But when you're running 2 tight ends, especially with Mayer, you can have him line up in an ISO formation at the fullback, or play as a true traditional hand in the dirt tight end, and then have Bowers, what he's currently doing right now, with all the jet sweeps and just playing as like a big slot wide receiver, which is just insane how he's moving. But he's a generational tight end that you have on your team, and you have to build around him as well too, right? So, in order to build around Brock Bowers, it's it's getting a better quarterback, and allowing that with Myers and opening the run game a little bit to make it easier for Bowers, so they're not, bracketing him and or doubling him and stuff like that. So, you could find that within Scott Turner to see in the final games. It's going to be a little bit difficult, especially with Desmond Ridder as your starting quarterback, and then, not to bring down Sincere McCormick, because I think he's doing a great job at this moment and with the time given, but he's an undrafted, free agent from UTSA. And I mean, 32 teams did not pick him up in the draft. And he had 200 other players above him. So, it's not something that you're not running away with, like even, like Tajay Spears, or like just naming names like Tony Pollard as your running back. It's a different running back, and if you can elevate him, I think it'll make you look good as well as an OC. And can you do that? And good for him to develop Sincere McCormick if that's possible. But you can also find, an OC outside, right, to scout internally and externally as well. Like figure out what type of scheme we want to rock with, right? If we're picking up Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, are we going to do, quick passing game, play action, bootleg, or are we going to, do it, run the ball and just play old school football, trying to figure out an identity, and then picking an OC to work with that, and then picking the players that match that scheme. I know it sounds easy, and especially from my end, which I have no football scouting experience or anything like that. Just, I would say, a above average casual viewer, but I think that's where you got to go, and you got to have some continuity, right, with your scheme, and then also building around it, and just truly believing in the process, but also having an adequate to above average OC to really take it to the next level. Case in point, Ben Johnson. I know he's like the gem of the head coaching season, but he came from a tight ends coach at the Lions, and then that offense struggled when he was just the tight ends coach. He wasn't the offensive coordinator, and as soon as he picked up the offensive coordinator, the offense was, I think, ranked top 10, and then now it's like number 1 or top 3 in the offense. So it's probably testament to Ben Johnson, but also figuring out your scheme and building and getting in the right players for it, right? Like David Montgomery, starting with Dare, getting that thumper back, and then you get Jahmyr Gibbs as your receiving back, and then let's develop Amon-Ra to be our number 1 alpha slot receiver, and then let's take the top off with Jameson Williams. That'll allow it to be easier for Amon-Ra, and then let's bring in Sam Laporta to be our tight end, since we lost TJ Hawkinson in that case. And so there's just little pieces like that, and then that could focus on the defensive side if you can develop them. And so it takes time, and I think a lot of people forget about it, So I play Dynasty football, and I'm starting to realize, okay, so certain times rookie wide receivers take time to develop, especially those day 2 picks, day 3 picks. They take time, or they don't even have to be elite wide receivers all the time to be a good draft pick. They can be players that just run routes to open it up for the field for the other players to develop, and they're still an interesting piece to have. For example, like Tim Patrick, how he's taken over, and there's certain things that you start to see once over a period of time with the offensive coordinator, like keep bringing up Ben Johnson, but Tim Patrick just replaces the Josh Reynolds role that Jared Goff really enjoyed having as a big body possession receiver. And then you have depth at that, right, with Allen Robinson. And then in terms of taking the top off or potentially playing in the slot, you have Khalif Raymond to do that for you. And then, at the running back position, you bring in, I think, Savon Vaki, getting away from the Raiders, but, trying to figure out pieces of that, right? So like, there hasn't been a long-standing OC or a sort of GM here to figure it out. So is Tom Telesco going to try to go out and get, a big body wide receiver like a Mike Williams? And then, you have your route runner specialist in terms of like a Keenan Allen with Jacoby Myers with a little bit faster. Keenan Allen's more acceleration, quick off the line, but doesn't have that long speed, where Jacoby Myers, I feel like, has that potential long speed to get to play a little bit more of this deeper go routes and stuff like that. And Keenan Allen can do that, of course, when he was younger, but trying to figure out like a situation like that. And you had Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler, or those potential pieces that they might bring in as well, like receiving back that could play like them, and then a thumper running back. I think it's very similar to that, but it's just a different scheme, especially figuring out what your personnel is and everything like that. So just finding talent all across the board. So draft, free agency, or trades. In terms of Tom Telesco, I feel like this is going to start with the draft. Like he stated, I think in the draft that he just had, just pick best player available. I think that was the right choice, especially with the Raiders. There's needs everywhere. I think that's the biggest part, right? And you don't want to be in a situation where you're like, hey, we're going to pick for need when we have so many other areas to improve upon. And probably a lot of people are like, man, we just can't. Why are we taking a tight end in the first round? You just see a generational prospect. You can't pass that, right? And it's just how it is. Like, and then you build around it. So now you have your tight end secured, and Brock Bowers is going to be there for a long time if you can re-sign him. So you have 4 years with him with the 5th-year contract. So that's 5 years to build around Brock Bowers. And in those 5 years, I'm pretty sure they're going to hit on a quarterback and hopefully an offensive coordinator. So it really takes time to build the team, and sometimes you just get lucky. I wouldn't say lucky, but you get the right pieces in a Commander situation where you're like, okay, this speeds up the whole process. Or you get in a situation like the Jets, and you thought, you get a quarterback, and now you have to reevaluate the whole quarterback situation, and you can't evaluate all your offensive positions because the quarterback play has not lived up to what it is, and the other wide receivers can develop, especially the running back situation. So, it's a little tough. And I think on the defensive side for the Raiders, I think they are in a decent position. I think Patrick Graham, either that, it's Patrick Graham or Antonio Pierce, one of those is really doing a great job in terms of defensive coaching. Probably the play calling is more on Patrick Graham, I believe, and game management for Antonio Pierce. But, they're 14th best at the passing per game, and this was before this week's current game, but they're against the pass. They're 6th worst in the league in QB pressure rate, and I think that just shows you, like, they don't have that sort of edge on the outside, and losing Christian Wilkins was a big loss. And I think that was I look at it now, I'm like, wow, you paid that much for Christian Wilkins, but you need help with Max Crosby to take the load off. And I think you saw it with the Kansas City Chiefs game. I mean, he's getting triple teamed and he's going, wow. So, they're a blitz heavy team. And I think you definitely have to address the edge in that position. But I think, retaining Patrick Graham is probably a good idea for right now, just to continue keeping stability at a certain positions. You don't want to reevaluate offense and defense at the same time. I think keeping Patrick Graham and seeing what he can do if you can have a competent offense with a quarterback. I think, a really good defense can't carry a bad offense, but a really great offense can carry a bad defense. I think it's just a little bit different, right? You need to score points to win games, and defense can't really score points that often. So, could Patrick Graham's defense take a step forward once the Raiders bring in, a better quarterback, a better offensive coordinator, or a potential head coach? So now it's time to dive in some potential coaches. And so, this is what the Raiders might do. I have no speculation with entire information or anything like that, but just some ideas that they might go across, or they might even wait. So I think the first one is just, the potential opportunity to stick with Antonio Pierce, as he knows the systems, the players vouch for him. You saw it with Max Crosby, but can he find the right coaches to call the plays on both sides? I believe he's sort of like a CEO type of head coach, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, because you rely on your offensive coordinator and your defensive coordinator to call the plays in the right positions, or you sort of game management and be like, hey, you're not calling that play. You're going to be calling a different play, and hopefully they can adjust and do that. I think some game management opportunities need to be improved on Antonio Pierce's side. It's just being aggressive on 4th downs, or either being too conservative. I think in that Kansas City Chiefs game, there was like that, they were about to get the first down. I think they challenged it, and then they went for it again on 4th down, running up the middle with Amir Abdullah. Like, I think that situation, I think you just get a field goal, especially with the offense that's struggling. I know touchdowns, you need it, but just to increase morale of like, hey, we got points against the Chiefs defense. We drove down the field. Our defense is playing great. Let's just get points and let's keep with it. And so there's less pressure for the defense to be like, hey, they're now at the 40 instead of us kicking a field goal, taking a little bit of breather. Now it's like, okay, we got to get the ball back again. So I think in this situation, I think, Mike Vrabel is also an interesting, I think it's more or less of just the idea of how he would be as a Raider. I think he would fit like the old school mentality of it. Now, how would this impact Patrick Graham on the defensive coordinator position. And I think Mike Vrabel had a few issues in terms of finding in the right coaches. I mean, Arthur Smith is a great offensive coordinator, and you're seeing it with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he was great with the Tennessee Titans. He just gets a bad rep what he had in the Falcons. And sometimes it happens, right? Mike Vrabel's replacement for Arthur Smith just wasn't there. And Ravens are in a certain situation right now, right? So the defensive backs coach, Denard Wilson, left for Tennessee, and they bring up Michael Orr, but the defense is still the same players, but the pass defense is probably one of the worst in the NFL at the moment. And so, and Tennessee is number one or number in the top 5 for that. So coaching makes a huge impact. And I think, Mike Vrabel just got unlucky and didn't have the right coaching to bring up internally or find externally, and it kind of bit him. So I think it'll be interesting to see Mike Vrabel take over the Raiders and bringing in that old school mentality. And I think he just fits with Max Crosby and sort of bring up this Lions sort of passion back into the Raiders franchise. And I think that's where I want the Raiders to realize is like, hey, let's become like the Lions, right? Let's play with our hearts out, and let's find somebody that brings passion that could be with Antonio Pierce or Mike Vrabel, somebody that just is like a sort of like a player's coach, and I think would be very important for the Raiders, and try to change the overall trajectory that's been sort of tainted with the recent head coaches and just the recent lack of success with the Raiders. And I think next in like offensive minded, you definitely got to put Ben Johnson in here. And I definitely don't have like the whole list, but Ben Johnson would be a phenomenal hire for the Raiders if they're able to get him playing in a dome. It's just a tough division, right? They all have quarterbacks, so Ben Johnson would have to get a quarterback. And is anybody in the quarterback draft class somebody that he's really interested? I haven't read any reports of where Ben Johnson is like feeling. I know I'll watch sometimes the YouTube videos and they talk about Chicago Bears, and I haven't dived into it, but it would be interesting if he does go there. If I was him, I probably wouldn't, just because you're playing against a team that, you basically wouldn't say created on the offensive side, but developed and helped coach. And then you're playing against them 2 times outdoors. And I don't know. I feel like Ben Johnson's fit would probably be somewhere where he's not playing against Dan Campbell 2 times a year. I think that's... And I think that's probably like mutual respect between him and the Lions organization. I don't know how he is personally, never talked to him, but hopefully that is the case. I just don't see him potentially going to Chicago Bears unless, of course, he falls in love with what he can do with Caleb Williams and that offense with DeAndre Swift. The Lions also, that connection there. But and then next, offensive coordinators that could potentially come in, Bobby Slovic, Cliff Kingsbury, these could be your head coaches, not offensive coordinators, of course. Joe Brady from Buffalo, Arthur Smith could get a second opportunity. And a lot of people are probably like, no. Clint Kubiak could potentially come in as well. It'll be interesting to see what they do in their philosophy with the players. But personally, let me give my personal anecdote after this last one. So I think the next one could be Brian Flores with the Minnesota Vikings. Similar to about Vrabel, he brings identity, he brings passion, he brings this sort of fly to the football, and you're seeing it with the Vikings, right? Their defense just skyrocketed with him after a few years of, hey, we're going to get this certain player like Van Ginkel, we're going to bring Dallas Turner, we're going to bring Stephon Gilmore and Brian Murphy. These are the players that I want. I can develop them and put them in the right positions to have this defense rolling. And now you're starting to see that with the Minnesota Vikings and just pursuing to the football. So that could be a potential coach. I know, a lot of people bring up the whole Miami Dolphins situation, and I think, that is important to bring up, right? So if you're going to bring in Brian Flores, has he changed his sort of psychological motivation to provide for these players, right? Instead of going on a, aggressive tactic to sort of spark the quarterback, is there a way that you can connect with him a little bit and, grow together? I think that's the biggest one. But yeah, personally, I believe Antonio Pierce should deserve a second chance. I think just the roster itself just hasn't gone there. The offensive coordinator coaching hire, I don't know if that was Tom Telesco or Antonio Pierce. That didn't go the way that they wanted it to go. Patrick Graham's there and he's playing pretty well, so I think he will still have a job with the Raiders unless he wants to move somewhere else. But I think Antonio Pierce, if you give him a second opportunity with an actual quarterback, a good draft class, and free agency pool to help out and leave out a little bit of, the tumultuous locker room presence, with the whole situation with Davante Adams and everything like that. I think it'll be important to look at. I mean, they did lose Davante Adams and Josh Jacobs. Those were core pieces for that offense that are, Josh Jacobs is doing phenomenal with the Packers. So, that you lose those players, and it's kind of tough to replace if you're not replacing it with high level players on this team. All right. So it depends on, how can we develop and grow this, and can Sincere McCormick be that type of player? So that's sort of just, I don't know how long this went, but just sort of my rambling of what the Raiders could do. And it would be interesting to see what they are going to do. And I'll be excited to see their draft and their offseason, and also players on their team that are getting a big opportunity to showcase what they can do for next year. So hope you guys enjoy, and take care. I'll be probably coming out with another episode, just a random one, probably talking about random things, but just excited to start this YouTube channel and just talking about football. Take care.